In the dim glow of a German command bunker, 1944, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the scent of leather, a general leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. The radio crackled with static, then voices, panicked, disjointed, desperate. Allied transmissions, they thought, the sound of an enemy collapsing under the weight of their own failure. The general exhaled a slow stream of smoke, his confidence unshaken. "They are broken," he murmured. But what he heard was not despair, it was deception. By the summer of 1944, the Western Front had become a fortress. The Germans, though stretched thin, held the advantage of terrain and preparation. Every Allied advance had been met with steel and fire. The war had ground to a bloody halt. And yet, in the shadows of command tents and war rooms, a plan was taking shape. One so audacious, so reckless, that the enemy would never see it coming. The Allied High Command knew the truth. Conventional tactics would not break the Allied German lines. They needed more than firepower. They needed a miracle. And in war, miracles are not born of luck. They are forged by deception. The experts were unanimous. No army could move that fast. The Germans would see them coming. They would be crushed. And yet, in the face of impossible odds, a single question hung in the air. What if the enemy's greatest strength could be turned against them? The plan was simple. Make the enemy believe they had already won. Let them hear the cracks in Allied resolve. Let them think their victory was inevitable. And then, when their guard was down, strike. The transmissions began. Garbled, frantic, the voices of men on the verge of collapse. Retreat orders, confused coordinates, the sound of an army in disarray. The Germans listened, and they believed every word. In the German command bunkers, the interceptors exchanged knowing glances. The Allies were falling apart. Their transmissions were proof. The war was theirs to win. And in their confidence, they missed the truth. What they heard was not defeat. It was a trap. While the Germans celebrated their perceived victory, the real battle was being fought in the dark. Bridges were built, troops moved into position. The storm that had blinded the enemy now shielded the Allies. The stage was set. Silence, the kind that precedes the storm. Beneath the tangled canopy of the Ardennes, steel giants crouch like predators, their true nature hidden from the sky. The Germans believe they have won. They believe the Allies are broken. But beneath the nets, engines hum with quiet purpose. The scout lowers his binoculars. "No movement! They're stuck!" The words carry the weight of certainty. The commander nods, satisfied. The Allies have played their part too well. Retreat, disarray, defeat. The illusion is perfect, and that is exactly what makes it deadly. The performance begins. Wood and canvas take the place of steel. The Germans watch as the Allies appear to flee, forces scattering like leaves before the wind. But this is no retreat. This is the first move in a game of deception, where the stakes are nothing less than victory. The eyes in the sky see only what they are meant to see. The photographs will show chaos, weakness, a broken enemy. The pilots do not question it. Why would they? The Allies have made it too easy to believe. The photographs confirm it. The Allies are in disarray. The officer leans back, smirking. "They're broken. We've won." The words seal their fate. Arrogance is the first step toward defeat, and the Germans have taken it without hesitation. The real advance begins. Not on roads, not in plain sight, but through the dark heart of the forest, where no one thinks to look. The Germans expect noise, confusion, the clatter of retreat. Instead, they hear nothing, and that is their undoing. Then, hell broke loose. The artillery barrage began, sudden and overwhelming. The enemy had no time to react, no time to understand. The deception had worked. The Germans scrambled, confused. "Where did this come from?" they shouted. But it was too late. The impossible had happened, and the enemy had no one to blame but themselves. The moment had come. After weeks of meticulous planning, of whispers and shadows, The Allies unleashed their armored spearhead. The tanks rolled forward, not in hesitation, but with the relentless momentum of a force that knew its enemy had already lost. The defenders stood exposed, their rifles useless against the onslaught. They had been told this sector was secure. They had been told the Allies would never dare. But the Allies had dared, and now the Germans paid the price for their complacency. The infantry moved like a tide, unstoppable, relentless. The radio crackled with desperation. "We're under attack! Where are the reserves?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The reserves were not coming. The Allies had seen to that. Above, the skies roared with the fury of Allied aircraft. Bombs rained down, severing roads, collapsing bridges. The German supply lines, once a lifeline, now lay in ruins. The trap had been sprung. The Allies pressed forward, exploiting the chaos. Every inch gained was another blow to German morale. The enemy's defenses, once formidable, now crumbled under the weight of their own disbelief. The officer's voice was barely a whisper. "This isn't possible." But it was. The Allies had done the unthinkable, and the Germans, for all their arrogance, had never seen it coming. The bridgehead was secured. Under a hail of gunfire, the engineers had done their work. Now, the river was no longer a barrier. It was a gateway, and the Allies poured through. In the German command post, chaos reigned. "Counterattack now," one officer bellowed. "No, it's a trap," another insisted. But the truth was undeniable. The Allies had outmaneuvered them, and the battle was already lost. They surrendered in droves, not because they were broken, but because they had been outmaneuvered. The deception had worked too well. The Germans had been told the attack was impossible until it was too late. The reports came in. Casualties were light, far lighter than anyone had dared hope. The plan had been a gamble, one that relied on the enemy dismissing it as sheer lunacy, and it had paid off. Berlin scrambled to explain the inexplicable. The defeat was recast as a withdrawal. The rout became a regrouping. The propaganda machine churned, but even the most loyal officers knew the truth. They had been outplayed. The last objective fell without fanfare. No grand speeches, no triumphant parades, just the quiet realization that the tide had turned. The men who had fought through the impossible now rested, their breathing slow, their hands steady for the first time in days. They had broken more than enemy lines. They had shattered the very will to resist. The streets that had once echoed with the march of conquest now trembled under the weight of retreat. Civilians watched in stunned silence as their soldiers, men who had once seemed invincible, now stumbled past, their eyes hollow, their steps unsteady. The myth of invincibility had crumbled. The tide had turned. No longer were they fighting for survival, they were fighting for victory. The commanders, once cautious, now moved with purpose. Every decision, every order, carried the weight of inevitability. The enemy was broken, and they would not recover. They burned what they could not carry, not out of strategy, but out of despair. Every crate consumed was another admission of failure. The reports came in one after another. The enemy is in full retreat. No last stands, no desperate counterattacks, just the slow, inexorable collapse of a force that had believed itself unbeatable. They advanced, not with the caution of men expecting resistance, but with the confidence of those who knew the battle was already won. The enemy had fled, the land was theirs. And, with every step, the legend of their triumph grew. The command post stood empty, a ghost of what it had been. The tanks moved through it like a force of nature, unstoppable, inevitable. The admission came at last. We were outplayed. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of failure. The deception had been perfect, the triumph impossible. The impossible had been achieved. Against all odds, against every calculation of reason, they had broken through. The enemy had dismissed it as madness until it was too late. The once proud soldiers now stood as captives, their weapons surrendered, their confidence shattered. They had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and outfought. The momentum had shifted. Every trench dug, every position secured, was another step toward the end. The enemy's time was running out. The flag rose, not as a symbol of victory alone, but as the final act of a deception so audacious. The enemy refused to believe it until it was too late. They had been told the attack was impossible. And yet, as the Allies advanced, the Germans found themselves outmaneuvered, not by brute strength, but by a plan so bold it defied logic. The message was simple, but its weight was immense. What had begun as a gamble, dismissed by the enemy as madness, had now rewritten the rules of the war. In the halls of power, the admission came like a death knell. They had seen the signs, the whispers of an impossible plan, and dismissed them. Now, as the Allies tightened their grip, the German High Command faced the bitter truth. Their arrogance had blinded them. The scapegoats were chosen quickly. Men who had once commanded armies now found themselves discarded. The deception had been too perfect, the trap too well laid. The next move was already in motion. With the enemy reeling, the Allies saw their opportunity. The deception that had won this battle would now pave the way for the final assault. Berlin awaited, and with it, the end of the war. In the whispers of the defeated, the truth echoed. They had been warned, but they had not listened. The Allies had played a game of shadows and lies, and the Germans had lost before they even knew the rules. The tide had turned. What had once been a desperate gamble was now an unstoppable force. The end was near, and with every step, the Allies knew it. In the quiet that followed, the truth remained. The battle had been won, not by strength alone, but by the audacity to defy expectation, to turn the impossible into the inevitable. And as the war's end drew near, one thing was certain: deception had changed the course of history.